Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Zagantz, and I'm the director and flute faculty for Z-Tunes Music. I'm excited to welcome Atlanta Symphony Orchestra violist Lachlan McBane as our clinician today. Mr. McBane joined the viola section of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra in 1998 and has served as acting assistant principal during several ASO seasons. Mr. McBane is active in chamber music around Atlanta and is a faculty member at Franklin Pond Chamber Music, where he directs the Fall into Spring student chamber music program during the school year. A member of the American String Teachers Association, he has twice been an adjudicator for ASTA's National Solo Competition. He has also served on the faculty of the ASO's Talent Development Program. Lachlan is the founder and music director of Bravo Homeschool Strings, which offers string orchestra programs for Atlanta area homeschooled students. For today's clinic, we will stay on mute while Mr. McBane works through the GMEA Viola excerpts. I suggest you have your copy of the excerpt and a pencil ready to make notes. You can type any questions you like into the chat box, and we'll ask them throughout and especially at the end of his presentation. So off to you, Mr. McBane.
Hi, everybody. So, wow, we have, what, 8 so far? That's great. So I'm here tonight to help you, hopefully, play your All-State Etude really well. And we're talking about Mazas Etude number 3. And so I think what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to go through in a couple different categories some details in it, and then I'll play through it for you and answer any questions that you have, if I can. So when you want to make a really great impression in any audition, whether it's a video or in person, there's a few things that you just have to do well, or you're going to not be among the top best people. And those are good rhythm, good intonation, good tone quality, and then one more, you have to be really prepared, because it's so obvious when you haven't actually learned it that does not make a good impression. And then there's one other aspect that would really put you over the top, and I'll discuss that too, which is to play it not just correctly, but musically. So I'm going to go through Mazas number 3 here a little bit, and we'll start with rhythm. So there's a variety of rhythms in this, but the one thing you want to be sure that you're doing all the way through it is you have to be subdividing. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that term from school orchestra or your private teacher, but what that means is you're thinking in your mind all the time of all the in-between beats, not just the notes you're playing. So for example, at the very beginning, we have so what I'm thinking when I play that with good rhythm is I'm thinking this. That's what I'm thinking. And if you think about all those subdivisions, then you'll stay accurate with all those rhythms. There are a couple little pitfalls rhythmically that you need to watch out for. One of them is the little grace notes that appear in a couple of places. So the first one is in the second line in the third measure, where it goes, and you want to play those really late, right before the third beat, but don't play it as though it was written out 16th notes, like. See, that's if I was subdividing. That's not what we want to do with these grace notes. They're actual real grace notes that should be very late. But make sure you get to the third beat on time. The other spot with those is down in the middle of the page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7th line down. At the end of the line, it says dolce and gets all smooth. I'm kind of assuming you've maybe looked at this etude already to start practicing it. So this is the spot where it goes. So if you all see where I'm talking about, those little grace notes there, at that measure in the end of the line, and then 2 measures later, same thing, they're real grace notes. They should come just before the beat. So on that very first one, the note that's on the 4th beat is D, and the grace note is E. So the D has to come on time on the 4th beat, as if I was playing it without the grace note. So like that. Then another little rhythmic pitfall you've got to be careful of is the next to last line. In the middle of the line, there's a dotted rhythm that has 2 dots on the quarter note a couple times in a row there. So that's a double dotted quarter note. And that means the 2 notes that follow it, those 2 30-second notes, are like, you might as well just play them as late as you can. So if they were single dotted, that measure would go, it would go, let's see, I better start at the beginning of that measure. That's the wrong way. The right way is, now really late here. So those are double dotted, but then in the last line, we have a similar dotted figure that is not double dotted. It's just the way you, I don't know if it happened earlier, but it's the way I played the first thing there. So on the last line, so that dotted rhythm is, that's the subdivision there. So make sure you make that difference. Let's see. And the other rhythmic detail is you need to really watch out for the note lengths throughout this. So at the very beginning, for instance, those are 1/8 notes, not quarter notes. Make sure they're exactly half a beat long. And then at the end of the second measure, that's a quarter note, so it takes up the whole 4th beat, and it's basically connected to the next note. So an accurate 1/8 rest between these 1/8ths. And then long where it's long. Okay, so just watch out for those details. Actually, there's a rhythm correction that's a misprint also. If you look 4 lines up from the bottom, the first measure, the one that goes, that's how it goes, but the 3rd beat of that measure, in my book at least, it only has 1/8 notes on those 4 notes. Those 4, those should be 16ths. So the measure ends with 7 16th notes. Like that. That's just a misprint. And there's one other misprint I might as well mention while I'm thinking of it. This is a note that's wrong, not a rhythm. In the 3rd line, the second measure, the last note should be a D, not a C sharp again. It has 2 C sharps in a row. It should be, I'm starting on the 3rd line here. Now, the final note of this group is a D. Not, that's what's printed, so that's just a misprint. All right, so the second category of stuff is intonation. And the first thing I want to say about that is there are 2 ways to check yourself. One is by just listening carefully, which is not a habit that a lot of people are in. You have to listen to what's coming out of your instrument, and if it doesn't sound great intonation-wise, you have to mess with it until it does. But the other is, now in this age of technology, you have electronic tuners available. I don't know if you've used the clip-on type or a phone app or some other standalone device, but you need to go ahead and use those to check yourself a lot. I probably do at least a third of all my practicing uh, with a tuner on in front of me, just to make sure that I'm staying honest. Okay, so make use of those. Now I wanted to mention a few spots that are intonation issues normally when students play this. The first is right where we were just at in measure 2. That, and then 2 measures later, and these happen a couple of times in this etude, right? You have to recognize that the A on this first one, second finger A, that's your anchor, and then the third finger and the first finger are half step away from it. So people tend to play the B flat too high and the G sharp too low. They're really quite close together, but let your ear tell you if it's in tune. And then the second one, the one in measure 4, is not the same finger pattern, because the upper note there, the E, is a whole step above the D, not a half step. But then the C sharp is still a half step. So be real careful of those spots. Make sure those are in tune. The second one is measure 30, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, the 7th line down. This is the measure that starts with a quarter note and then has 12 sixteenths. The next to last note in that measure, you see it's a B flat and it has a 4 on it. And yes, that's correct. That's an extended 4. What you should do is leave your whole hand in first position and just reach out a half step higher for that B flat. Don't move your hand out of first position, or then the notes that follow will be out of tune. So let's see, where am I? Keep that third finger on G down on the string, and just make sure you reach far enough that it isn't out of tune. But if you try to jump with your 4th finger and grab that by jumping higher or trying to shift to it, then everything else will be out of tune. So stay in first position and stretch for that. And it's a similar concept, just a little more than a bar later at the top of that scale that goes quite high. It goes up to an A flat. So you're in third position going up. And then the final note, same thing. Just leave your hand where it is and reach out with your 4th finger like that. And don't try to jump to it, okay? Let's see, measure 42. This is the beginning of the 4th line up from the bottom. It's the one we made the rhythm correction in. That one, I definitely recommend that you might want to use the fingering that's on the underneath the notes instead of above. The one above is the same concept that we were just doing, but in my experience, it comes out a lot better if you play the first 2 notes in that measure in third position and then shift down. So 2, 3 on the first 2 notes, then shift down. You can use the fingering on top, and if you do, it's the same principle we just discussed by reaching out the 4th finger, but it's really hard to make that second note in the measure sound big and accented and full when you're reaching for it like that. So I would use third position there. And then the really tricky spot for a lot of students is the high part going into the last line. The fingering that's here in the part is fine, and it's the one I would use, but you have to do two things. One is make sure you really know what the pitches are. You may not be good at reading all those ledger lines, but you need to learn it kind of, you need to learn them, but you need to also play it a little by ear and just know what the note names are. And you can see the same notes are two measures later, lower down. So if I'm at the last line, I'm in the middle of the measure that begins the last line here. Those same notes are right after that. They're the same pitches, just an octave lower. So you've got to make sure that the high thing sounds just like the lower one. I misspoke. There is one difference. The first high one starts on an E flat, not an E natural. But you can play it lower to hear how it sounds, and then make sure it sounds identical but an octave higher. So making sure those notes is one thing. Don't guess. There's no need to guess. Just count it out, figure it out, and they're the same from the B flat through the next few notes as the lower version. Now, the big shift there in that first bar from E flat up to B flat can be problematic. And the way you need to think about that shift is with a guide finger. I don't know if you've heard of that concept in any of your solo pieces you may have worked on. But what it means is I start on second finger on this E flat. Now what I'm thinking isn't jump up to fourth finger. What I'm thinking is shift my second finger up to a G, which happens to be where my second finger's going to be if I'm playing the fourth finger right. So that's what I'm thinking in my mind, and you can practice it that way when you're going slowly. And then what we're going to do is slowly eliminate that middle note. But using that concept when you're practicing it slowly to get that shift well is going to help you play it in tune, because you're not just going up high somewhere, you're going from third position to fifth position. It's a very specific distance, and using that guide finger will help you be accurate with that. All right, so that's rhythm and intonation. Did I give you a whole page full yet? See people writing. So that's hopefully good. All right, tone quality. I'm not going to address tonight how to get a good tone quality out of your viola so much, but I'm going to talk specifically about the articulation that you need to make, and this goes along with playing the notes the right length too. This whole thing is entitled Firmness of the Bow, and it says firmly with the upper half of the bow without leaving the string. So that's important because it means you're going to set the bow for the beginning of each time you start something after a rest. So for these first notes, for instance, the bow should be on the string in the upper half. That doesn't mean right at the tip, just above the middle, or rather I should say the middle or above. And then you need to press with your index finger, press down enough to give the note a solid attack, like that. But then it's what happens the rest of the note that is going to give you the best tone quality. That'll make it clean to give it a good attack. But then you need to listen to the whole note. A note has an attack, and then it either decays or it doesn't, and then it's either held out or it isn't, and then it's released somehow. So for these, it's going to have a attack like I described, and then it's going to decay quite a lot. And that, if you do that and you release the weight and pressure with the bow, it's going to let it ring. I don't know if that comes across on Zoom at all, but it should ring like it does when you're plucking an open string. And if you do that, it'll give you a great tone quality, and it helps you pay attention to the note lengths too. So you're not going to grind all the way through the full length of the note. That has a good attack and it's accurate, but it doesn't sound so great. Is more the sound you want. Again, I don't know what you can hear over the audio on Zoom, but that's the approach for all of those separate things. And you're going to start the groups of notes like at the end of the second measure. That first note should have a nice attack at the same way. Index finger setting the bow and then go. Like that. And then another aspect of tone that I'll just touch on is what kind of vibrato you should use. You do want to use some, but it doesn't really need as much as you might think. Especially on the viola, we can get away with a little bit less as long as it's not a really slow, warbly kind of vibrato. I like to think on these kind of short notes of just having live fingertips rather than trying to go back and forth and back and forth. So I'm giving each one or two wiggles basically, and they're not even a full wiggle like we would do on a longer note like that. It's more just a little, just enlivening the note a little bit. So you want that approach on all the short notes, and then on the longer ones you can use a regular vibrato. Make sure it's just kind of medium speed. If it's too fast like a violin, it can be a little bit excessive sounding on the viola sometimes. Make sure it's not too slow either though. All right, so that's rhythm, intonation, and tone quality. The other thing I was going to mention, well, I mentioned preparation, and I don't really need to go through that. You need to take care of the details, is what that means. Listen, figure out what needs corrected, figure out a way to make it better. Now, musical issues, though, are what would really set you apart if you can do the other things well. So, I'll mention a couple things if you want to write these in your music, if you have that in front of you. At the very beginning, it's really nice if you can contrast a really stern approach to those first 6 notes with a much smoother approach on the group of notes. So, and then smoother here. Same thing each time that sort of thing happens. And the same thing also in measure 7. All of a sudden, it can be more lyrical whenever you've got the connected stuff like that. In the end of the third line, where you have all those separate notes, you need to recognize musically you've got 2 lines going. Some of the notes are in the bottom line. And the other notes are a top line. And you want to bring that out. So what I would do, there are different ways you could do it, but I would play the 2 upper notes in the middle of the bar a little softer maybe, so that it sets them apart and everyone can hear that you've got these 2 lines going at the same time. And then this measure is different. I play more, less, more, less on the third measure. Okay? These are just nice ideas that'll make it sound musical. In all these spots where you have these 12 16th notes in a row, starting in the fifth line there. Probably you're going to want a crescendo through each one of those runs, leading to the last note at the end of the run. And the same thing a couple lines later. Let's see. Sorry, I'm reading my little notes I've written, but my handwriting is too messy and now I can't read it. Okay, so the end of the line in the middle of the page where the smooth part starts, if you can recognize that what you've got here is 4 two-measure phrases, then that'll make it nicely musical. You're going to want to let down at the end of each two-measure phrase, except that the phrases start in the middle of a bar, right? Because this dolce it starts in the third beat of the bar. So the first two-measure phrases, and then there's 2 more. So they're like spoken sentences, sort of, or half sentences with a comma in the middle, maybe. But you need to bring those out at the end of each little two-measure phrase you can let down. And then at 42, which is the beginning of the 4th line up from the bottom, the one we corrected the rhythm in, I'd do the opposite here and really crescendo into that new section. Okay, well, I think that's all the details that I have down in my notes. So I could take a few questions, and then I'm going to play through it, but I'm happy to answer a few questions before if anybody has any. So, any questions, comments? None?
I don't see any questions popping up, but I'd love to hear you play through it. Why don't we do that? And then if anyone has any questions while he's playing, go ahead and type them in.
Excuse me, my phone is ringing. Just a minute. Yeah. All right. Somebody's turning it off. All right. So hopefully that won't keep happening. Sorry, I do not know how to turn that home phone off. All right. We are here for a run through of the whole thing. The good thing about this etude is it's not fast. So you have some time to think. Some of these go, really fast, and if you haven't just got it totally cold, you're going to have stumbles. But this one, you have time to think ahead of everything you're doing pretty much. So the bad news is that means there's not much excuse for mistakes that you make. So I will try it. This is just about the speed that they recommend, 96, which really isn't that fast in this case. So hope this goes well. Here we go.
Bravo, Lachlan. That was awesome. So we did have
Thank
some
you.
questions pop up. Elena asked, how do you tune measure 47 to 52?
Oh, that is a good question. Um, well, one thing that's really helpful, I mean, there's no easy answer to that. If you're thinking of the first and second notes together, and then the third and fourth notes together, and so on, it's a lot harder. If you can think of the first note and then the second and third notes together, make an interval that I think most people can play a little better in tune, and then the fourth note and the fifth note together. So in other words, the first interval here, that's one that is not easy. What is that, like a diminished seventh or something? I'm a little rusty on my theory, but it's much easier to think of than these two together because they're just a half step apart with the two fingers here, even though they're different strings. And then the same thing. So in this case, I mean, yes, use a tuner, but if you can group the notes in your mind a little differently, you find it's a lot easier because the first and second note together are a tough interval, and some of those others, especially one measure later, same thing. So that'd be my number one tip for that.
Great. Also, how do you keep from running out of bow in measures 21 and 20 to 23 and 29 to 31?
Well, the answer is really simple. You have to get to the right place and then save enough bow. So at 21, that's the fifth line down, you make sure that you don't start like at the frog. I mean, theoretically, you're playing this whole thing in the upper half, or at least maybe you go in a little bit into the lower half, but it's mostly upper half. So if you start right in the middle for the first note, you can easily get way out by the tip with a good sounding note. And then you want to basically get back to about where you started, so you have to use a slow bow. And I'm right back in the middle. I'm not even getting all the way to the very tip. That could be actually risky because you run off the string and it gets stuck, right? If you've ever done that, it's most uncomfortable. But I'm, out near the tip, and you just repeat the exact same thing with each of those. It's maybe easier in the following passage because the first note is a full quarter. It's easy to get out there. But to save bow, it's one of the things I write in my orchestra parts all the time, and solo parts. SB for save bow on a passage. So right above that slur, I would write SB. And then, of course, if you're going to use that slower bow, you've got to adjust the weight and maybe the sounding point, closer to the bridge or farther from the bridge. But so it's a little more intense sound when you're saving bow like that. I'm not going, with a fast bow at all. So you have to adjust the other things till it sounds good, but there's really no other way to do it, and it's not that complicated. You just have to plan well and execute your plan.
All right. Well, that was all the questions we had from our students tonight. Thank you, Mr. McBain, for your valuable insight. I know I learned a lot, and I'm not even a viola player. And good luck to everyone on your upcoming audition. Look out for more
Good
communication.
luck.
Thanks. Look out for more communication from Z-Tunes on lessons and upcoming clinics for Allstate and more. And have a great week, everyone.
Okay, thanks.